Okay, good morning, members, and welcome to the Governance and Audit and Standards Committee. A bit of housekeeping here. Could I introduce myself first? I'm Councillor Leo Madden, I'm Chair of the Committee. I'd like to draw your attention to the following. Safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble by Queen Victoria statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, if you signed into the Guildhall, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. Live web streaming. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed and that the camera zooms in to show the speaker. This is linked to the microphones, therefore can I please remind all attendees to turn their microphones on to speak and then off again once you have finished speaking. Members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to website this meeting. So can I ask members to introduce themselves? I'll start with Councillor Swan.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Benedict Swan, Copner and Anchorage Park Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Good morning, Councillor Stuart Brown, Fratton Ward.
Councillor Ashmore.
Morning, Chair. Dave Ashmore, Councillor for Fratton Ward.
Councillor Smythe.
Councillor Judith Smythe, St Jude Ward.
Thank you. I'll ask the officers to introduce themselves.
Hello, Peter Belf, City Solicitor. Apologies to the committee today for not wearing a suit. I omitted to put one on this morning. Apologies, thanks.
James Harris, Senior Local Democracy Officer.
Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor.
Julian Pike, Deputy Director of Finance.
Richard Locke, Assistant Director for Procurement.
James Berry, Solicitor, Legal Services.
Apologies, Chair, for being late. Chief Internal Auditor Elizabeth Goodwin.
Well, you were here earlier on, Lizzie, so that's forgiven. Okay, thank you, members. Are there any apologies for absence? We are one short, but there's been no apologies received. Is that right? So, yeah, no apologies for absence. Any declarations of members' interest? None? Okay, thank you. Can we do the minutes of the meeting of the 23rd of November 2022? Okay. And I'll do them page by page for matters, accuracy and matters arising as well. Okay. Page 1. Page 7. Sorry. Could I just, a little point, James, that I've just noticed in some of the sets of minutes. When the second part, 45, so the apologies for absence. Councillor Peter Harris was in attendance as standing deputy, so was Councillor New. But Councillor New gets himself raised up to being present, but Councillor Scott Peter Harris doesn't. It's just a bit of consistency, that's all, yeah? I mean, either both of them are, or raised as present or whatever. Anyway, anything else on page 7? Page 8? Page 9? Page 10? Page 10, 51, compliance with gifts and hospitality. The Fortnum and Mason hamper. After much toing and froing, members, I copied all the stuff out to members who were at the meeting. It turned out that the hamper itself, it was a small hamper, I think, when I think a value was put to it. But I think it's just, I suppose, for city solicitor, if in future we'd like as much information as possible for anybody who comes to you for advice. Yes. Yeah, because I know you do. Okay, so that seems to have resolved itself. And page 11. Okay. Thank you, members. No problem. Any declarations of interest? Thank you very much. Thank you.
Chair, on that matter of the minute about the gift from the port, you say it's a small hamper, but we did look up on the net and they were all quite expensive, these hampers. And did Councillor Vernon Jackson accept the need to be more detailed in his responses in the future?
Certainly not in any of the correspondences you've seen, because I copied it out to everybody. But I think, I don't know the background to it as such, and I don't know, and it could well be that the ones that are advertised. This is what I'm assuming, Judith, is that somebody went and got special ones or different ones. So could you give a smaller? I presume, but it was called a hamper.
I think this minute isn't quite detailed enough, because we did actually take the trouble, two of us, to look up the value of these hampers, didn't we? And this doesn't look as if we really took it that seriously. And I think the minute should have been a little bit more. It isn't just that we believed the gifts were of value. We actually looked it up. It was easy to look up. We think we did actually come to the conclusion that the recipient of such gifts should be more detailed about it. And I personally don't think this minute quite reflects that. And I'd be happy to have that recorded in our minutes today, rather than... It says the value wasn't known. Well, it wasn't. And then we did actually look it up on the net, and you could see. And it'd be more expensive to have a hamper made up, to be honest. Then I just don't think it looks like we're taking it as seriously as we did. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, thank you. Well, I got involved in quite a bit of correspondence, if you remember on it. Could I suggest then, Councillor Smythe, that we put something in? I hadn't quite finished the amendment here, but in respect to the Fortnum Mason hamper that had been gifted to the leader, members looked up the range, and the range of such hampers were from £50 to £6,000, if I remember, something like that. I can remember all the things, yeah. And I asked that in future, where there are gifts to members, more detail is provided. But that too. Did you get that, James?
Yes, thank you very much,
Is that okay?
Chair.
Yeah, thank you.
Obviously, it was one of the minute it was public information. We found it easily, didn't we, both of us? And yeah.
Item on the agenda is the CPRs and the paper, the supplementary agenda that's been sent out to members. I think Richard's here and James, is that right, to deal with this? Do you want to introduce it? I'd like to do that, yes. Do introduce it.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So, apologies for the lateness of the report. We're waiting on some final comments, but but we'd like to recommend that the CPRs are taken forward to full council for discussion and hopefully approval there. Key reasons that we want to progress on this now is, as it stands, we haven't reviewed our CPRs since really 2015 in any great level of detail. We have significant procurement reform coming up, probably the biggest change to procurement rules in decades. And for us to really grasp the flexibilities that are going to be within those rules and allow us to be dynamic, we need a much more dynamic set of rules locally for us to work within. I'll pass across to James in a second to sort of talk through why we have to have these rules as a legal requirement. But when we were looking at these and engaging in with various stakeholders around the council, sort of key benefits that we want to try and focus on with this is still keeping a high level of scrutiny into the decision making, but not having a set of rules which takes away flexibility in decision making and actually limits our ability to engage in with local markets, engage in with voluntary community sector and so forth, by having very rigid rules to work within. So that's some of the sort of key aspects that we're looking to take forward from this. If we take the CPRs through, that will then hopefully allow us to kick on with a lot of other initiatives in looking at how we undertake procurement as a council and enable us to be a lot more dynamic in how we do that. James, do you want to add anything in respect of the legal context?
Thank you, Richard. Yes, so as you'll see in part 3 of the report, there is a legal basis for the council having rules as to how it procures goods and services. The national framework at the moment is the public contract regulations generally. There are other regulations that are also relevant to the council, so the concession contract regulations, which concern those types of contracts. And the other key bit that the council has to focus on when it's procuring is that it's a best value authority, so it has a duty, as 3.2 says, to make arrangements to secure continuous improvements in the way at which it functions, having regard to a combination of economy, efficiency and effectiveness, which may be through procuring contracts. So the rules as are attached to Appendix A have very much been structured in a way to flow through the life cycle, of a procurement activity, which Rich can go into in a bit more detail. But they are really focused on the requirements under the public contract regulations, so those legal obligations that are upon us, to make that clear. And it's also been drafted in a way to hopefully make it a lot a lot easier for officers and members to understand the process. I'm sure you'll agree there are bits of legalese in there, but it is intended to be a much more easy to follow, logical process.
Thank you, James. So some of the key aspects, as is set out within the paper, is we wanted to take people through the kind of procurement journey through the rules, so make it a lot easier to navigate. So start at the front in actually understanding, okay, what is the need, how are different ways in which we can address that need, whether it is through procurement, whether it's through insourcing, whether it's through shared service agreements. So making sure that that is happening in that logical order. Then as we move through, making sure we're doing proper pre-procurement activity, so engaging with the market, engaging with other councils that might have purchased similar things, because that's where we get a lot of value, is all in the planning and understanding what we want to buy up front. Then taking us through the process, so engaging with the market, getting interest from suppliers, inviting bids, evaluating those bids fairly in an auditable manner. Going through the award processes that we need to under law and also under our local governance with Gateway, and then also a much greater focus into the back end of procurement activity, which I think was neglected a bit under the previous rules, and certainly James has brought a lot of value to that in focusing on some of the legal aspects to make sure people do then follow through, get the contracts properly executed, and hopefully also put us in a much better place to get much better contract management when we combine that with some of the other initiatives that we're doing on revising the key performance indicator system, for instance. So the idea is people can come to this, they know from the front page if they're beginning the process, that's where they start. They can then help them to navigate through. What we're going to be doing alongside this is other training. So I've been engaging in with SIPFA, and we're looking at a simple course, not to make people in the services into procurement professionals. That's what my function does, not to make them into procurement lawyers. That's what James and Peter's function does, but to help the services get a good understanding of key procurement principles. So when they come to look at this, combined with the training, combined with some good implementation and workshops around this, it should hopefully improve procurement performance for the authority, which I think is going to be key, particularly with the reform coming up. If we're able to increase our competency now and get to a better position, then we're going to be in a much better place to react to those big changes and grasp those opportunities. I think that essentially captures the key aspects that we wanted to put across in the report. So happy to pass across for questions, Chair.
Well, Richard, thank you, and James, thank you very much for that. I have a few questions. I'll come in a minute with it. Sorry, I picked up the hard copy this morning, but I had to read it online, so I'm not the best person for reading things online, and I may have missed things. But what I did do, I looked at the old contract, or the old papers that we had, because I think I've been involved in drawing those up many years back. And could the old papers, first of all, I have to say, the contracts themselves now, the waiver goes from, the bigger size goes from 100 to 150. Is that something? Is that a local decision, or is that something that's in law somewhere?
That's a local decision. The reason we've put the 150 is because the first statutory threshold, which isn't a local decision, that kicks in at £213,000, £447. So that includes for VAT. So that gives us a bit of a buffer as to when we get engaged. It also enables the services to have more flexibility in how they contract and commission, and it also gives us a bit more flexibility in my own teams in terms of how we deploy our resource. So it's just moving the threshold up by that £50,000. It still keeps us the buffer in respect of those high risk procurements, but doesn't mean that we're getting engaged into things at a lower level where there's a lot less risk, and we should be giving the services more freedom to procure and contract.
Okay, thank you, Richard. I personally have no problem with that. You know, I mean, it was 2015, I think, the last time we really. This is the papers I have in front of me. Consultants. Now, the last one actually said, and I do remember some discussion around it. We were concerned about the sort of revolving doors of senior civil servants and senior public personnel going, you know, from one bit to another. And it does say, no ex-employee of the council or any other public body covered by the small business enterprise shall be engaged by the council without the express consent of the city solicitor and the service right responsible for human resources. I couldn't find that in the new papers or anything. There's mentions of consultants, obviously, but I couldn't find that in the new one. But have I missed it, Richard or James?
No, that's not dealt with in the current rules. Is that to do with the exit provisions? I believe the government was going to bring in provisions where there was a limitation on returns back into local government. My understanding was that those provisions didn't actually come into law ultimately, but that is something I could review, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the background to it, James, and whether there was a particular problem with, you know, suddenly you've heard somebody's gone, and then in the corridor you see them there again. You know what I mean? And not too sure, and then back as a consultant. It may not be the same these days, but it's just to cover our backs, I think it was, in that sense, to make sure that everything was above board. Could you be allude that, James? I'd be grateful to that. There's a bit in the old one, public-to-public cooperation or in-house bidding. Now, I think we have a policy decision to seek to in-house bid. If it doesn't, you know, if it doesn't stack up, then we don't do it. But again, did I miss something in the new report on in-house bidding?
Well, we want to really avoid in-house bidding, to be honest. What we want to focus on, if we're looking at in-housing, is the pre-procurement activity. So if we're going to do a make or buy decision, it's best to do that right at the front end of the process. Otherwise, we end up with the council services bidding against private sector organisations, where we don't have dedicated bidding teams. We're not in the business of tendering for public sector contracts. We probably don't put ourselves forward in the greatest reflection of our own capabilities. Plus, it also adds a lot of risk and complication to the whole aspect. So within the new rules, what we're seeking to do is bring that much further forward into the options appraisal. So before going out and undertaking a procurement, the relevant portfolio holder service director should be reviewing their arrangements that they have in place and looking at options, and it could come off the back of that through looking at an in-house provision, doing some soft market testing, speaking to peer councils, that it could lead to a decision to bring a service in-house. That's probably the better outcome we want to get towards, rather than formally going into a procurement too quickly and then having to develop an in-house offer to then compete against an experienced private sector.
No, I get that, Richard.
Yeah.
I really do. But I thought that we had to, I don't know if through the gateway, I mean, I think we're talking about, we've taken some things back in, haven't we? The running of Harry Seltnick, for instance, has come back in again. So some things, the contracts that we, under CCT, that were out, I thought we had a policy, a council policy, and I might be wrong, to say that this would be, so that would be, if you're looking at an exercise, one of them would be to look to see to bring that contract back in. Not a cursory glance, but an in-depth glance, and then it was to be rejected. Reasons for it, and there will be reasons for it, as you outlined.
There's no formal policy in place on that. It's something which I've had discussions with the leader on, and what was agreed was to have a much greater focus at the front end of procurement activities, and to be providing service directors and portfolio holders and cabinet with the details of the contract, so given a pipeline of the contract, so that could be reviewed at that portfolio level. So rather than having a policy that covers the entirety of the council that might limit the decision making, to have that a bit more flexible and dealt with within the portfolios. That was how that was left. There was discussion in respect of introducing a process around that, but we drafted it up and it didn't go any further than that.
Okay, I must be dreaming these things then.
It was certainly discussed in quite a few times, but it didn't go as far as into a policy.
But where we had it specifically at the old conditions, we don't have it now.
Not in the same manner. In the manner that we have now is very much towards the front end of the procurement activity rather than looking towards in-house bids.
James, yeah?
But just to sort of detail this, where you would be deciding whether to in-house or not would be as part of your options appraisal, so that's part 10 of these new rules. The council's got that best value duty, which is it should be undertaking to decide whether it is insourcing or whether it is best value for it to outsource. So that would be where the decision comes into it. This document wouldn't be telling you which one's the right option, it would just be telling you how to come and to decide on which option to take. So it's really driving that evaluation at the outside in part 10.
Okay, thank you, James. Councillor Smythe, Judith?
I was going to pick up that point as well. I've got 3 or 4 points, if that's all right, Chair. I think the options appraisal is the time to do that, but I think it should be slightly strengthened in this, that we will be looking at whether it would be better to bring things in-sourced. I am particularly keen on eliminating the ability for the for-profit private sector to profiteer out of public money, as you would expect, being a member of the Labour Party. The point is that there have been times when moving to use a for-profit organisation has resulted in waste of public money going to shareholders' profits. And I think we could strengthen the options appraisal side to add a bit more of a look at how people make their money, what their motivation is, and whether they're really motivated to provide decent outcomes and public services, or whether they're really motivated, and at the end of the day that's how it will dictate their behaviour, to make excessive profits. I'm using extreme words that you wouldn't necessarily use in this, but I don't think that that is clear enough in the options appraisal. But I do think that's where it should be in the options appraisal. So I'd like a bit more clarity there. I think actually you've done a really good job here in distilling what these steps are, and the rules are very clear. I think this is clear and interesting and well written. However, I've got 2 or 3 points I need to raise. Paragraph 7.3, 7.31, grants to local and voluntary organisations, which are dealt with in the financial rules, don't apply. People who know my most recent work in the last 20 years, it has been about moving us on from grants and moving us into contracts. Grants are money that you give to people to do something, and you need, I think, the same rigour. And there should be some element of competition between voluntary organisations. And I'm not talking here about punitive processes or processes that very, very small voluntary organisations can find very difficult. I think that with grants to voluntary organisations, very small grants should remain under a small grant regime. But some of the times we want to use voluntary organisations are for really enormous pieces of work, and they should then be subject to some of these same rules. And I don't think that this makes that clear enough. I mean, there are a lot of not-for-profit organisations now competing for very large pieces of work, and there is a market between them of competing for that work. And I don't think that's quite reflected enough in this I think it would need to be mentioned once or twice to make that clear. And I'm all for us contracting with those very large non-profit organisations, incidentally. I think that's really very important. Now, as well as grants for small organisations. In general, I think this whole document doesn't put in a strong enough case for making judgments on the basis of two things. One is quality of service, and I'm thinking particularly here how important the quality of care is if you're thinking about outsourcing adult or children's social care or education, or the sort of health-related things. You've got to set up in this document the justification for judging contract performance and indeed judging contract management by reference to quality. And perhaps even more important, this talks all the time, let me go to the reference on this, this talks all about the procurement of services and, sorry, I did mark it up, it's one of those huge ones with a 4 on it. Bear with me while I find the reference. I can't find it. There's too much, there's no real talk about contracting on the basis of outcomes, rather than contracting on the basis of a service, a thing, a period of work. And very, very often, in the social care particularly, one is looking for a contract, might be quite a lot of money, it might be over quite a long time, but it's not just about the thing you provide, the number of nights stay, the number of activities provided, but the actual impact on outcomes. There are lots of areas in social care where you can, go on doing the same, banging the same old drum for a long time with no effect at all. And I want us to get away from that. We need to get to the point where providers of service, particularly in social care and in children's care, can move towards individual budgets in some cases, so that people themselves define what would make a difference to them and what wouldn't, and can define the service. So we're less and less interested in that case of saying you've got to provide this number of day centre places, you've got to provide this number of night stays or this many classes, but you've got to actually show evidence of impact on people. And the fact that a individual may decide that actually visiting his grandmother once a week is miles more important, then the judgment is that that makes a difference to that person's individual life, not that it's listed on a list of possible services. And I think with this actually does take us a little bit away from that. And I was rather disappointed in that sense. It seems a little bit old-fashioned, and it seems that it doesn't necessarily align with what people are trying to do in the best social services departments about adult and children's care in the two departments, which is about getting to the bottom, service providers getting to the bottom of what would really make a difference to that individual and what would make that individual have better outcomes in their life. And I think that's what I would want us to lay out in a few places in here, but particularly on some of these 4.622. I couldn't find the reference. I did ring it, but we need to be able to set up our contract rules in a way that allows us to monitor success or failure on the basis of outcomes, not just on the basis of a good services provided. Do you know there are hundreds of services still provided in adult and children's social care where the activities are provided, but nobody turns up, or nobody seems to want it, or nobody seems to think it's important, or there's no measurement of the outcomes of it. Is this improving somebody's life? Is this improving their life chances? Is this improving their ability to get work and stand on their own feet and actually meet their full potential? And I think that this document isn't. It seems to be more about. I mean, there isn't really a service that we provide where it's completely black and white, but this seems to be much more about procuring things or specified services. I even think actually that you should be looking at outcomes when it comes to procuring contracts and management consultants and so forth. I was in a management consultancy that did agree to be measured on in terms of outcomes and impact, and it was jolly tough. But it did mean you couldn't get away with providing the specified report and walk out of the door without having had any impact at all. And I think we should expect that of people. Also, doing it the way I suggest means that we've got a much better chance of being able to manage the contract in terms of outcomes and outputs, and indeed that of outcomes for people, and also the quality of that outcome, the quality of the service. And that, I think, becomes increasingly important when we're trying not to waste public money. I do appreciate that it's mentioned all the way through this, that we're looking at effectiveness, efficiency, and effectiveness is to do with outcomes, but I don't think that's a sufficient mention in my mind. It should be something that runs through this like through a stick of rock, really. I'm sorry to go on, Chair, but I think it's really that these are really important issues. And I think that this is very good in that it distills the tasks, very good in that it's clear and easy to follow, and thank you very much for that. But it does not, if I was coming here to contract for Portsmouth, I would think that it was a mite old-fashioned and a mite too much about things and activities rather than outcomes and outputs and quality. And I want us to manage contracts through a dialogue with private providers, whether they're in the voluntary non-profit sector or the for-profit sector, where you have conversations about quality and you have conversations about outcomes for individuals. Because they're, to me, much more important than counting the number of things that go into a contract. And I'm very happy to have some further conversations. I did spend quite a lot of my working life working exactly on that issue, and I do think it remains very important, although it has that whole piece of work and the way that that's expressed in legislation has taken a big backward step over the last 14, 15 years, I have to say. The work that was done 14, 15, 16 years ago, particularly around adult and children's services, was very much more moving towards being focusing on outcomes rather than on processes or activities that didn't necessarily work. And I regret that, and I hope that we can move forward better on that. And there's nowhere a clearer example of that than the scandalous contracts that are being looked at the moment to do with PPE. PPE was specified without having tight enough contracting, without having tight, and we all know that some of the rules were flouted then anyway, not by us, but that they just simply didn't look at the performance that was expected. And that performance can change as more things are found out. I would have written a contract there that said this has got to keep up to date the changes in regulations about what is effective PPE, and the contractor's got to do that, not just, buying stuff that became out of date and obviously wasn't any good. And I notice with horror that they're now having to pay out to get that PPE destroyed. And I mean, that's the kind of horrific example of a public sector contract that we must absolutely avoid ever even going near. So that's the reason I want quality to be in there. Quality and the ability to respond to changes in research during the life of the contract, which might challenge the quality of your original thing that you agreed, and the whole business of outcomes for citizens. Sorry to go on so long. Thank you. Oh, and there are lastly, a tiny thing. There is something at the end that says on paragraph 4.1.1 there's something obviously not been put in that needs to be put in. So these are clearly a draft, and I'm sure that'll be put right in the full.
Before I bring you in, Councillor Wade, do you want to answer those points?
Yes, certainly.
I come from a different angle on that than you do. I mean, outcomes are important, clearly. But that would be part of the process, wasn't it? You would tell people what you want.
Doesn't say so in here clearly.
Well, it did to me. I mean, it's just the... I don't think you can write an absolute tome on it. I mean, you know, people will know what to do. We need to procure this, right? It could be in-house, it could be not, but nevertheless, we've got to say this is the remit for it. And then that would be challenged thereafter if needs be. So once the award's made, we would then look, whatever the section is, we'll be looking at that to make sure that they're doing what they did in the first place. With a bit, you know, particularly ones, you're particularly right, particularly in social services, the ones I've come across as well, where I find that where we have awarded contracts, the actual contractor goes over and above what we said, because it's that sort of caring bit of it, right, yeah. But I don't know that we can write anything about outcomes. I mean, I don't think we want to be bogged down. I think this to me was a process. And I can't see any mention of grants, for instance. I want to come to grants in a minute, but the rules don't apply to grants to local and voluntary organisations because they're dealt with elsewhere, Judith. And I wouldn't want to complicate things by, as long as people are satisfied that we're not discriminating, which we don't, against the voluntary and local and voluntary organisations. And then it gives a list there on 7.3 of which ones don't apply. In relation to the PPE, and of course it now turns out to be a scandal, but in that sense, but we when we actually, as an organisation or as a committee, sat down and looked at it, we had to waiver a lot of stuff because it had to be done there and then.
Yeah.
So in a way that the PPE had to be done there and then, and if somebody else is concerned that it wasn't handled properly. And I think I can accept circumstances where that's going to happen. There needs to be an explanation for it, clearly, and we have accepted in the past, you know, in previous meetings that there was a need to do something urgently rather than go through the process. But I don't have any points on the... I'm happy with 10, by the way. I've now seen it, and it mentions in-house. So it's there, and when the training exercises are happening, people will be told, you know, the whole package of seeking to procure includes in-house. But I don't know if you want to answer any of those points, Richard
Yes,
or
please,
James.
yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Councillor Smythe, for those points, really good points that were raised, and to yourself, Chair. I think going to the point on specification and contract management, hopefully it's come across in previous committees, and when we talk about contract management, that we do have a flexible approach. We have contracts which do deal with things and outputs, so how we commission a lot of our building work, so we need that building to be built to that standard, to that timescale and so forth. We do have other things, though, much more towards measures, where, okay, we want to work in partnership with a care provider or you know, repairs and maintenance contracts, for instance, very partnership focused there as well. I think within this, what we need to be mindful of is that this set of rules is should be relatively straightforward, neutral set of rules that allows for flexibility to do the right thing for that service at that time. So underneath this, we'll be reviewing our governance process, so our gateway and other bits and pieces. That's where it allows us to act dynamically and ask the right question for the right service. So certainly, as we start to revise those, whether that's in respect of the options appraisal aspect, that's where the detail and the dynamism will come in, and how it will talk more to the specific area, rather than trying to get it into the rules, because otherwise the rules will end up becoming too focused onto one area rather than another, and potentially limit decision making. So that's the idea. I do think, though, looking at the section on specification and contract management, it would be quite simple for us just to add in a couple of words there that talk around outcomes in respect of how we devise a specification, because I do think, taking your point there, Councillor Smythe, it talks probably a bit more towards the traditional way of doing things. And I do think the CPR's can set a tone, but probably the key aspect I'd suggest that we focus into this is that as we look at the documents that underpin this, which is the actual governance documents underneath, which is where we engage with the services, this essentially is just the top level framework. The decision making and how we do the procurement all comes from the stuff that we do underneath. We can follow a similar thing in respect of grants as well. Grants, if it's a pure grant, it shouldn't come under the contract rules because it shouldn't be a contract. If it's a contract, then it's not really a grant anymore. And I think what we'll need to do off the back of this, and we've been working well with Jules on this point as well, looking at financial rules, is help the services to understand what is a grant versus a contract, when is the right time to turn the grant into a contract. And a key thing we're aiming to do with these flexibilities in these rules is enable us to get into the midpoint in working with a provider where we want to hold them to more of an outcome-based specification and service levels, but we're not quite ready to tender that service yet. Because under the regulations, there's a higher level threshold. It will hopefully enable us to have more flexibility there, but we do need to, in the background, I think, come up with some additional guidance to services. But I think that needs to be flexible and something that's underneath this broad framework of the CPRs.
Thank you, Richard. Judith, you want to come back?
Thank you, that's very clear. I think the use of the word outcomes, I don't say peppered sounds wrong, but put in especially where you suggest, but also elsewhere would be helpful. So I'm not suggesting changing this. I think the distinction between the rules and what goes on underneath the rules would be a helpful thing to clarify a bit further. The other thing that I was going to raise was the question of the social value act, the wider benefit you get from a provider who offers to employ locally, for example, who we know has a good equal opportunity policy, who we know is going to follow the law and particularly is going to employ people locally and train people locally, possibly needs a little mention as well in here, because we would be more interested for people who are going to offer additional value to a contract, and that isn't mentioned in here. So I'm certainly not talking about complicating this. I'm talking about making sure that it really can attract the best contractors, frankly, when they come to look at the rules. And the Social Value Act is an important part of that. And with any environmental benefits that people can offer, obviously other things are still going to be important in this.
Just in response to that policy point, so social value is widely implemented across the authority now. We took a report fairly recently through to Cabinet, which we're more than happy to share with the committee. We do talk about it here, but the reason that we don't focus too heavily into it is because we need to make sure that underneath these rules we have flexibility for that policy to be dynamic and change. And the other reason is that there's going to be other initiatives that we want to bring in as well. And to make sure that we build that, and this is where the gateway process and the options appraisal that goes underneath this is vital. That's the instrument that we can bring these things in dynamically. Otherwise, we'll have to be coming back to committee continually to ask for changes to the rules. So, for instance, we've got work that we're taking forward on modern slavery this year.
Yes.
That's going to be a big focus on implementing strategic policy through procurement and contract management. We also need to do more on environment. And then there's going to be a whole range of initiatives that will go forward. So I just want to assure committee that we could have written War and Peace about social value into here. There's a reason that we haven't, is to give that flexibility underneath, but also to give room in the future to be able to respond to future policy changes and flexibilities, either that we deal with locally or that's put upon us on a national basis.
Thank you. That's good. Again, a little reference to the fact that will happen at a different level would be useful and keep these ever fresh. But thank you very much, Richard. I think it's a good piece of work.
Okay, Councillor Williams-Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. I think Judith did touch on a few things I was going to ask, so that's quite helpful. I think my question will be quite quick. In terms of the training implementation, I just wanted to know how far along you are with that, because under the assumption that at full council in March the new changes will be accepted, I just wanted to know it says here in 5.4 that information and training materials will be developed. I just wanted to know how far along in that development cycle you will be, just in case, let's say there's some new employees of the council who will be trained in the old systems, but then has to go through their own form of training for the new rules. And possibly, I'm not worried, but I would say there could be some contracts or that come to fruition in that kind of overlap part of the implementation. So I just wanted to know how far we are in developing the training materials that are going to be provided in the 1st of July.
Yeah, I'm certainly happy to answer that. There's some distinct sort of areas of training. That there's training we're developing which is almost neutral to these rules, which is just good procurement practice, and that's the work that we're doing with SIPFA. And that's essentially going to condense it into some modules that officers can undertake in the course of a day. Also like to discuss with SIPFA stuff that we can do for members as well. So I know, Chair, you've asked before around some procurement training and aspects like that. So something that takes this but can also make it flexible to different audiences. So that's one aspect that we're doing with SIPFA, and that's kind of neutral to whether these rules get taken forward or not. That's just good procurement practice of going through that procurement life cycle effectively. Alongside this, though, which we're also going to be developing, is dusting off the e-learning package we had previously, which is much more just around more black and white application of these rules. So what do the rules actually say, and directing people to the right places for advice. So that we'll be developing that. We probably will be working that up as we get closer to full council, and if we get more comfort that we are going to be moving towards the July launch date. So we're going to be on the front foot, essentially, is what I'm saying in respect of the two key aspects there. Another thing that we need to do as well, we've been through Directors Board, we've been to major projects, obviously we're going through to Council. But once it's looking like this is all going to be going ahead, myself along with James and his team, so people from my senior team, will be going to all of the service, SMT and portfolio meetings, and hopefully from that what we'll also put in place is that procurement and legal will come jointly on a quarterly basis to those SMT meetings. So hopefully from members, directors, senior teams in portfolios through to the people that are actually at the coalface doing the management, we want to make sure we cover all of those bases, so we've got understanding, buy-in and skill sets being developed in that period. And it's part of an initial piece of work. If we get that culture in place, when the procurement reform comes in, so I'm a bit of a broken record on this, but it's very, very important. When it does come in, we're going to be in the right place as an organisation at all levels to really grasp that and become a leader, rather than run a risk of the new rules coming in and we just don't exploit any of those flexibilities. We actually do the opposite, and we tie ourselves up in knots that stop us getting near to acting more commercially and more in the interests of our local communities.
Perfect. That's what I wanted to hear, just basically that we're going to have that experience there, so we can compete with whoever we need to. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members? Okay, can I just make a point? Could I say that comparing the old papers, Constitution Part 3A, and the new revamped ones, I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I congratulate you on producing a document. I think it's one of the best I've seen in years, a rewrite of something which actually makes sense and leads you from one thing to another. So well done, and congratulations to that. Now, I'm not saying it's gone through yet, but I'm saying from where I'm sitting, I was very, very impressed.
Thank you, Chair.
And it made it very easy for me to read and almost understand.
I have to say, Chair, it's actually James who's written the rules. I've inputted into lots of the workshops and assisted, as has Jules from Finance and others. But
I wouldn't. You're the one introducing it, Richard. I wouldn't take any credit away from yourself, so I'd leave it there. Yeah, and
Thank
that.
you.
Now, members, there's a few bits to be. There's a few more words to be put into it. What I'm going to ask our members happy to accept it with the other words to put in it, but it's how we get the words in order to stick to the time scale that you want. Because our next meeting, I think, is March. All right. So I think it would be. I think if we can clear this today, but somehow would members be happy to be emailed words so that there's any and agree to it or not agree to it or seek to change it, but hopefully agree to it. And then we can proceed with it. Is that okay? Thank you very much. So could I ask members whether they agree with item 4, the procurement, the newly drawn up contract procurement rules? Happy? Happy, thank you. And thank you, Richard, and thank you, James, and everybody else who was involved in it.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Can we move on to item 5, Treasury Management Monitoring Report for the third quarter of 22-23. Julian.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report is before you is the Treasury Management Monitoring Report for the third quarter of 22-23. It is for noting, and we bring it to you because it's best practice for us to report the Council's Treasury Management activities to you on a regular basis. Sorry, excuse me. The report outlines in para A2 one exception where a Treasury Management limit was exceeded for one banking day, but in all other respects the Council has remained within its Treasury Management policy and all of its indicators that were set by the Council on the 15th of March 22. The exception I've referred to occurred on Friday the 2nd of December when a £5 million deposit was made with a bank based in Asia. This had the effect of increasing the total amount deposited with that counterparty to £29 million when the approved limit for that counterparty was only £26 million. The error was identified later the same day and immediate action was taken to arrange the return of the deposit, which was returned to the Council the following Monday on the 5th of December. The leader of the Council and the Chair of this committee were notified of the error in December, as required by the Treasury Management Policy. The overall Council's position for Q3 budget monitoring position is still being compiled, but interest earned on deposits continues to run ahead of budget due to 9 interest rate rises over the last 12 months and is expected to show further improvement compared to the Q2 position, which reported a £2.5 million favourable variance on interest earned. Happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Julian. Thank you. Could I just remind me, under 2 there, whilst the Council's portfolio of investment properties that don't come under Treasury Management, we do have the reports, Julian. What do they come under?
They do, and they're produced by Tom Southall, who reports to Cabinet, I think it's on a number of, I'm not sure if it's twice a year or 4 times a year, but he reports separately performance of those investment properties portfolios.
We do. It's mostly external audit that bring them up with us, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly figures quite largely in the valuation of the fixed assets on our balance sheet. So yes, it's something that they focus on.
I did have a bit of a laugh, I have to say, about the 5th of December thing, the £5 million, but it resolved itself. Judith, Councillor Smythe.
I would quite like us to see in GASC this report that we don't get about properties, but I'll just leave that with you, Chair, because I know you get it in Cabinet, but I do think it's something we should be looking at as well.
I'm not on Cabinet.
I know. But so I would like to see that. Maybe a Cabinet paper could be sent to us for information or something, but that seems a gap to me. The infringement that happened in the early December, have you... how did it happen, first of all? And second of all, have you put in measures to stop that happening again? I appreciate it's been resolved now, but nevertheless, I just wanted to know.
Yes, Chair. Yes, Councillor. The background to it was what should happen is before any deal is concluded, the loans register should be referred to check 2 limits. One is the geographic limit for where for the area of the world that we're putting the funds into, and the second one is the counterparty limit. That is maintained in the loans register on a real-time basis. What happened on this occasion is the person relied on their recollection as to what the geographical limit was, and they were correct in that recollection. They then used their recollection again to confirm in their own mind that there was also satisfactory headroom within the counterparty limit, and they went ahead and made the deposit. They then updated the loans register, and the loans register immediately flagged to them the issue. They have been reminded formally that they are required, and as have the rest of the team, that they are required to check the loans register before entering into any deals. I think it's fair to say, and the person responded positively and said they've accepted that reminder. But to be fair, what they did go on to say and said even without the reminder, they'd learnt the lesson and wouldn't be making that mistake again. So, and then the second thing that we've put in place is what used to happen, or what previously happened. There was a monthly review by the technical and financial planning manager of all outstanding deposits in the loan register. That has been switched now to be a weekly review, so we've increased the frequency of monitoring as well.
Thank you very much. This makes me think that it would be really good if the officers could sit at the side. I'm getting quite a crick in my neck trying to make eye contact.
Okay, thank you. Well, all the members could be sitting up here. I don't know, one thing in the other. I find it very frustrating sitting down there as well, the meeting as well, Judith. I'm with you on that one. Any other points, members, or questions? No. Can we then recommend that the Council's Treasury Management issues in the period up to the 31st of December 2022 set out in Appendix A, and 2, the actual Treasury management indicators as at 31st December 2022 set out in Appendix A are noted. Okay, members? Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Thank you, Julian. We now come to item 6, Internal Audit Performance Status Report to the 10th of January 2023. Lizzie.
Thank you, Chair. The report is the progress report stating the position of our audits and obviously bringing forward any narrative around the audits that we have completed since the last reporting period. I'm not certain why on your printed copies on page 29 why the pie chart doesn't come out with the pattern that is contained, but just to clarify, in relation to the 53%, those are the items that have been finalised. We have 20% that is outstanding, 19% is in field work, and 8% is in draft. We should be on target to complete the plan as proposed, but there is a flux in work that is outside of our normal remit in relation to internal auditing, and we've also had an influx again in grants since this report was drafted. So the content in here, happy to answer any particular questions. It will have audits that have been completed along with any other follow-ups that have been completed. Chair, if you're happy, I'm actually going to leave it at that and actually take any questions that may arise from the audits that are contained within. Nothing else specifically to raise with you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lizzie. I did have something. I did these papers a few days back. I can't. I just look particularly at the critical ones and the high ones rather than the other ones. On page 35, direct payment, Director of Adult Social Care. Fairly minor stuff, I think, in a way, was it? But there wasn't a lot of money changing hands. I just wonder if you've given it a bit of a high profile, and I thought it didn't quite deserve it in that sense, that it's not lots of money, but things hadn't been acted out properly. So, I don't know in future whether these things have been resolved, aren't they? The one, of course, that concerns me, and of course will concern Councillor Smythe, we've been around here before, is the home to school transport on page 36. The problems we had in the past was the fact that the drivers weren't being checked. You know, and I presume then the assistants or people sit if in minibuses or whatever hadn't been checked. And I'm not too sure that is that on the verge of being resolved? Because we spent, I think it was about 6 months the last time, Lizzie, or thereabouts, seeking a resolution, and education stepped in the end and did something. But is it in the point of being resolved? Because I don't think we can have children being driven around the city with people who haven't got or properly vetted.
Chair, in relation to your comment around the direct payments, we've included that narrative because there are still 3 high risks opened, but I actually wanted to paint the picture that, as you narrated, the issues that are outstanding are reasonably minor. In relation to the home to school transport, Paul has greater detail and he's going to give you some more narrative. And that will include that you're right, historically we have had problems. Those historic problems took a long time to resolve. There is a significant change in one of the requirements or how one of the requirements is satisfied. But I'm going to hand you over to Paul to give more detail.
Thank you. So it's a difficult one because we've seen progress, but it's not quite there, and some of the issues are down to factors that are slightly outside of the control in relation to the new structure and the new system which is being procured by education. So in relation to the checks, they are very close and completing all of those checks. The percentage that we had this time was a lot better than it was originally, and as you can see, the follow-up completion date is March of this year, so we plan to follow this one up as soon as we can once we're past that date. So it's still open because there's still a few minor things outstanding, and a lot of the actions, there was multiple actions on all of these exceptions. It wasn't just a one-size-fits-all, we can fix this. So there has been progress. It's not quite there, but we're keeping it on our radar.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Paul. But is anybody higher up in the organisation doing something about it? Because, as I said, we went round in circles the last time, and I just have the feeling we'll be going round in circles again, that's all.
Sorry, and just to come back on the DBS, there was still an outstanding DBS ones, so that action is still open, and we will follow that one up. On the senior manager.
Chair, in relation to senior management, the reports do go through to the director of this particular service, which would be Mr. Samuels. A copy is also given to the chief exec, and education have visibility and sight. There has been changes, and I think we need to quite rightly keep focus in relation to this, because it seems to take a long time to resolve itself, and then obviously clearly what we're presenting to you again is that there is another similar issue that we can't really afford to have moving forward. So it is on the relevant tables. Whether this committee would like some visibility from those individuals, particularly perhaps the director or the assistant director, but all relevant parties at a senior level will be aware that there is an outstanding issue to which they are working on.
Thank you, Lizzie. Judith?
I'm glad you raised that matter, because I was going to do it in a very similar vein. I still dread the headline that says we've been wrestling with this for several years and still haven't done anything. If the full horror of the risk was to come about of a potentially vulnerable child being harmed in school transport, home to school transport, I hope that through these minutes and through you, Lizzie, we can tell everybody that we are still very worried about this. It only takes one, and I know that's one of the reasons why this is a difficult thing to get the system right, because taxi drivers come and go, vehicles are different, and there are a lot of variables here. But it does only take one, and it doesn't look good, the fact that we and others have been looking at this for several years.
One of the issues to perhaps revisit is when this historically came on the table, it wasn't identified, I think it was probably during the audit process, that there was a vast majority of those who would undertake the home to school transport routes who were taxi operatives who would have been registered within our area. And one of the significant changes is there is a large cohort of those drivers now that no longer get their licensing directly from the authority. So the authority could rely upon, and it did a reconciliation between the data sets. Now we're going obviously to outside parties, that coupled with the layers around significant changes in the staffing structure has compounded and resurrected the ability to be able to verify that we have the relevant DBS. So we had a good mechanism that got put in place historically. That unfortunately has changed, as I said, solely on the basis that it's no longer the authority required to issue the licensing for a cohort of our current drivers.
I do understand, Chair, that quite a number of drivers have come down, for example, from Wolverhampton, a city I know well. But if I was, say, a driver who, for one reason or other, couldn't get work in Wolverhampton, I'd come to somewhere like Portsmouth and I might be a very high risk. I think the fact is that we would take the rap if something happened to a child, regardless of whether that person had been registered to drive as safe in Wolverhampton. And I don't think that's a satisfactory answer. I think we have to require to see the DBS checks and overcome that difficulty.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the issue's been raised many, many times at licensing. And it is an issue, and it's mainly Aqua, isn't it, to Aqua drivers, as I recall, although there's a presence here in the city, you know what I mean? So it shouldn't be, what we are told, or what Aqua tell us at meetings, is they cooperate when needs be, when council asks them questions on the various drivers in this. So hopefully some problem is, as we established before, there's licensing involved, there's education involved, and it's that cross thing that seems to complicate things. But this is due to be implemented. I think we can leave this to the next meeting in the hope. But could someone refer up to say that we are very concerned as an authority that some children may be driven around the city with drivers who haven't been vetted?
And just for clarity, it's the evidence of their DBS. And Councillor Smythe, I take on board your comment around the acceptability and this scenario not being acceptable. The narrative around where we were able to obtain that evidence, as I said, is hindered because we're now having to go outside and then we're engaging with third parties, i.e. the suppliers, in effect, not necessarily the individual drivers.
I think we have to continue with our, generally good relationship with Aqua. They've expanded recently, taken over another firm. They're terrifically important to us on this work, and they should respond. It is their responsibility who they employ, isn't it? Or have I got that wrong?
I was going to say, can I clarify as well? I don't think we would have to hand which operator it is, and I know you mentioned Aqua, but I can't confirm whether that is accurate or not. I know they are likely to be one of the suppliers, but it's not. I'm not highlighting at all that it is Aqua that is causing problems.
Oh no, the problem is, you're absolutely right, people who are registered outside the city, and therefore we've got no control over them, and we have to go cap in hand, if you like, and ask for information in relation to the particular drivers. But can we see what happens for the next meeting? Is that okay, members? Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Internal Audit Performance Status Report. I recommend the committee notes the audit performance for 22-23 to the 10th of January of this year, and secondly, the highlighted areas of concern in relation to audits completed for the 22-23 audit plan, including follow-up work performed. Is that noted, members? Thank you very much. Okay. The next item is item 7, which is the whistleblowing annual report policy. Over to you again, Lizzie.
Thank you, Chair. The report is to flag to you any whistleblowing incidences which we have received. Obviously, anything that is received, the content may be that it needs to be referred elsewhere. The policy is also attached because it is healthy that we revisit on a regular basis. The structure that we have in place for whistleblowing is pretty comprehensive. You can see that we've had a decrease since the previous year. However, we've since received additional whistleblowing, which is outside this particular reporting period. So there are no significant amendments. There were some amendments made following last year's presentation of this report, which we fed back into the policy. There are no other proposed changes for this year, and there are 3 incidences which are contained within the appendix. There is limited information that we would be able to provide, but if you have any general questions around the content of Appendix A or the policy itself, happy to answer.
Can I say, first of all, thank you for the policy documents again. I've seen them many, many times, but I think it's important that they are repeated every year and members can have a look at them, and particularly, the process on whistleblowing. I wouldn't expect too many whistleblowing anyway because of the because of COVID and whatever. The only one that intrigued me, and the only one that I've been treating, is the I suppose the one about the secondary employment. Well, the person I've been told this is somebody who worked in a pub or doing something in the evening or whatever. Doing sickness, of course, used to be a sackable offence, but maybe we're getting a bit soft as an authority. Not necessarily here a sackable offence, but where I used to work, it was a sackable offence. If you said you were off sick or whatever, and were seen doing other work, or involuntary work. But however, it's the allegations of bullying, and that's interesting, isn't it? And that's still under investigation. That's a difficult one. I think it's one member involved, one member of staff, and have they been suspended? Oh, Lizzie.
They haven't been suspended, is my visibility in relation to this particular case. But obviously there is investigation that is underway, and very often, if there are circumstances, there is potential for the individual to perhaps be located in a different part of the service while the investigation is undertaken. To be honest with you, whether it's a bullying allegation or whether it's an allegation of a different nature, if the individual needs to be relocated, that will always be considered against the risk profile of doing so. Bullying is a difficult one to actually follow through, but it's relevant that the professionals on the HR side of the equation and on the management side of the equation pick up on anything that is flagged, and it is taken very seriously. I think from last year's report that was presented, there were similar concerns, but they weren't necessarily in the same service. And last year, when I was in front of you, I raised the fact that coming out the back of the pandemic, concerns regarding safeguarding, but there was a narrative underneath that regarding how perhaps stretched and mentally fatigued cohorts within the organisation were, and I think that was having an impact as well on some of the concerns that were being raised and why the concerns were being raised. But there was a large piece of work undertaken by 2 directorates, adult social care being one of them, to actually deal with concerns of this nature.
Okay, thank you, Lizzie. Members, any questions or points? No. Judith?
Just to follow up on that, and are things getting better, therefore?
Difficult to gauge whether it's getting better when some of our triggers are that we receive allegations that kind of coming through. I I think we'd probably need to do a little bit of work to see the evidence that would support that it is definitely getting better. I think the fact that there were communications and there were various workshops, and then we envisaged there would be perhaps an additional little flurry of concerns being raised because of the support and the narrative that was presented. And that in itself doesn't necessarily say that it wasn't a positive part of the process. So difficult, there isn't any great way of measuring.
There isn't. I mean, I suppose our concern as a panel is the procedures. And we have to leave it up to other people, don't we, to decide what the penalties are not should be. It's getting more difficult these days. I mean, you know, you can be accused of all sorts of things. And that's why I was wondering if we had a static thing where you accuse somebody and they get suspended. Because I don't think that's wise in some occasions, I must say, you know. Because I could accuse all senior management, couldn't I? Oh, you'd enjoy on this holiday, though, Peter, if we suspended. It's difficult, but again, the procedures are there. We've looked through the procedures in the past, and I think the procedures are quite good in relation to defending people who are whistleblowing. Or coming up with whistleblowing, which may not come to fruition, or may be something false. I've had whistleblowers coming to me, not in this authority, but in the past, people I worked with were allegedly doing some. And when the investigation took place, it was just bravado. It was just saying things, you know, that made them sound good in the pub or whatever, you know what I mean? So it's not necessarily that. I'm not saying that suspension should be, we have to leave it down to management to decide what to do, but you know, the other thing is because there aren't many reports, which again is a good thing, isn't it? Or is it a bad thing? I don't know. Anyway, thank you. Councillor Smart,
just to follow up on the concern raised in relation to an undeclared secondary employment. If there really was a secondary employment, I am surprised that we haven't taken further action, unless that secondary employment has been completely discontinued and can never start again. Certainly when I was managing a housing association, that would have been a sackable offence.
Without going into detail, there is always wider context. So whether the individual was part-time, whether the secondary job had a significant impact on their ability to perform their main job. So there is always wider narrative. If it is felt that actually, no, it is having a significant impact, it is inappropriate, there are certain roles where you wouldn't, but action would be taken.
I understand that exactly, but people must expect us to ask questions when it's not explained.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions or points, members? Thank you. Can I recommend to you that we note the report in the attached Appendix A, and we note the whistleblowing policy at Appendix B. Is that okay, members? Thank you very much. Thank you. We go on to item 8, report to this committee on complaints received into alleged breaches of the Code of Practice by members of the City Council for the calendar year 2022. Over to you, Peter.
Hello, members. This is the standard report I present to you every year, relevant to engagement with the Members' Code of Conduct. Before I deal with the matters raised during the course of the municipal year, could I merely ask you to look at paragraph 2.3 and indicate that I would seek a recommendation from yourselves to thank the independent persons who are assisting me in this process. And the reason I ask that is A, for it to be recorded by this committee, and secondly, I always write to them personally, but I need your authority to do that in an appropriate way, and I will do that subject to you agreeing that that is an appropriate course of action today. They're quite important to me, and they are volunteers, and they are members of the public who use quite a lot of time to come and assist this committee and me in my function as the monitoring officer. So I thank them personally anyway, but I think it's good that the committee know that they are very well engaged. They're good people as well. In terms of the actual conduct engagement this year, it's been a pretty limited year, actually, in the sense you've got a number of complaints that have gone through the IFP process, essentially 4 in number. First of all, I apologise for the spelling of defamation as opposed to deformation, which is a mistake on my part. Apologies for that. In respect of 1 and 2, They flow from the same allegation, in the sense that advice was given to me to members relevant to a potential defamation claim at law. The relevant member involved was reported to me and dealt with, and the recommendations there were a meeting with me, at which point an apology was given and a retraction in the sense of under the Act you can make amends. And that amend was essentially accepted by the relevant cohort of complaining members. Interesting case, and I have to say one that was dealt with very favourably by the members concerned, in the sense that the complainants dealt with it in an extremely sensible, mature way. I have to say they're a credit to the organisation for doing that, because one would have expected something more to flow from that particular breach, but there you go. 3 was a cascading allegation against one particular member of the authority relevant to supporting a claim that is currently before the court. My deputy had no hesitation in not accepting that. Interestingly, no recommendation of doing anything was given by the IFP. As a result, the complainant could have taken that to an assessment subcommittee, but chose not to do so, which is an indication of A, the process working properly, and secondly, the veracity of the original complaint, in the sense it was to support a claim before a court. Therefore, it was essentially not engaging in the code of conduct. It was an adjunct to a process to put litigation pressure on. So it didn't go through the net, put it that way. The 4th one was essentially not accepted on the basis it was not a political. It was a political activity and not one that engaged the actual code of conduct at all. So my deputy had no hesitation in throwing that one out as well. So it was actually quite a sort of fallow year, really. There's only 4, 2 from one particular member, and one of no consequence whatsoever, and one that engaged but was rejected on the basis of not engaging the local assessment criteria. So I think it's a sort of good reflection, but it does sort of probably flow on the back of COVID, in the sense of less activity for members and less political activity generally. So I wouldn't say it's indicative of anything other than business as usual, really. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I just merely ask for the recommendation that I sort of thank the independent persons as usual. Thank you, members. Any questions?
Well, thank you. We'll be doing all the recommendations, Peter, including that one. So
thank you, Chair.
Rest assured we'll do them. Look, it's the same old chestnut, isn't it? Well, when we hit the Standards Board of England and Wales, they could be quite draconian in some of the measures that they meted out to people. In fact, in taking you off the council and things like that, right? Yeah. The government, but I think it's about 3 years back we were talking. The government had suggested they'd be rewriting the rules and giving a bit more teeth. There is actually no teeth to this, and I don't know why people bother complaining. I must say, because you're not going to get anywhere unless. I have no idea who was complained against. I just see the first 2 which are linked was member against member, which is unusual, but I don't think I've come across many of them. And then the other was member of the public. However, the member was requested to do something, and that's all we can do, isn't it? We can't say you will do. Have you any idea whether the member did it or not?
Yes, the apology was dealt with, yes. I've seen that.
Okay, right. And provide a correction to the news?
Yes, that was done as well. In the sense it was asked for, yes.
Oh. I must live in a vacuum. I have no idea who the member is at all, but there we are. Anyway, that's done.
I couldn't possibly say.
No, that's fine. No, because we used to have members' names, and I was the one recommended we take them off. I don't think it was fair. We're concerned about complaints against members, not who the individual members are. Anyway, any questions or points on that, members? Okay, thank you. So can we note the report? Can we consider whether any further action is required, which we haven't? And can we place on record our thanks to the independent persons?
Thank you, Chair.
You all right, Peter? Oh, wait a minute, I haven't cleared it yet. Is that okay, members? Okay, thank you very much. I think so. And we're on to our last, the old chestnut. Item 9. I missed one. The consideration of the political balance rules in relation to the constitution of subcommittees considering complaints against members. Members who have been around for a while will know anyway. What we tried to do, what Democratic Services tried to do, was to get different members, i.e. members from different groups, onto a complaint, which I think is the right thing to do, but there are occasions when because of time, we can't do that. So this is really, we have this, I think we had about 2 times last year when there are changes to the to the council.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think members were, sorry, I'm getting a bit bearded with this sort of stuff, but members, any points or questions on this? No? So can we accept the recommendation then, members, that whatever it is,
Thank you very much.
political balance are disapplied in respect of governance and audit, which are considering complaints against members, and also the same arrangement should apply in respect of initial filtering panel membership. Yeah, okay, thank you very much, members, and thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Done it all.